we can never forget John McMullen, who always brings it for us here at this time. Johnny Mac, day one of training camp. How are you, John McMullen?
I'm hot, and I feel crowded. But other than that, I'm doing well.
Are you telling me, Johnny Mac, that something changed between last training camp and this one, or OTA? I mean, because I saw the detailed map, and let's start with this, right? So today was the first day of actual practice. They practice tomorrow earlier at 9:15, but I see, like, you know, of course, you used to be able to park in the complex. Now you got to park in the Navy Hospital lot. Your media house is like right inside the gate. There's very much a theme to me, if I study this map correctly, of how can we keep reporters out of the building as much as possible?
Yeah, well, that's been going on for a while. And I think it's interesting if you come here and remember it's only for selected season ticket holders and marketing partners and people like that, fans. They have the metal detectors, but they are conveniently placed beyond the media house. So you can attack us all you want.
You might not want to tell people that.
Yeah, I probably should. All right, scratch that.
But nevertheless, that's a funny factoid of how things are set up. So day number one, of course, Ryan and I sat and listened to Doug Peterson was early. What gives with that? Usually it's supposed to be talking at 2 o'clock. He gets up there early.
Well, he didn't feel early. Well, everything is tentative. As I explained to Josh, he was expected to speak around 2 o'clock because practice started at 12, but they ended at about 1:40. So it was sort of a ramp-up practice. Obviously, you're not allowed to do a lot of things in the first 3 days of practice, but it was a 10-10-10 session. And what that is, for people that don't know, you do 10 minutes of offense, 10 minutes of defense, 10 minutes of special teams, and it's designed for execution for that particular unit. So you're really not going all out offense versus defense. So it was sort of a ramp-up practice, and they ended it a little bit early, and that's why Doug spoke a little early.
Now, of course, the big news when he did speak was, or the big news out of camp, I guess, is one guy that wasn't on this PUP list. This made news in the last 24 hours, but Carson Wentz was out there taking part. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was an erroneous story to begin with, that the Eagles were considering putting him on the PUP list. For some reason, NFL Network reported it, but anyone who was here over the spring, Carson was already cleared for 7-on-7 work and obviously individual drills. And if you put him on the PUP list, he can't do that. So it was a strange story. It was not true. Doug Peterson said today, I have no idea where that came from. And lo and behold, Carson did even more than anybody expected, because this is the first time since the injury on December 10th that he was in team drill. Now, again, it was a scaled-back practice, and we'll see as they do more. I don't think he's going to be in team drills day after day after day, but this is the first time he was in team drills since the injury.
Hey, John, it's Ryan here. How you doing, man?
I am hanging in.
Hot and crowded. So, John, the new slogan, no more underdog T-shirts. I saw this on your Twitter timeline here. The new phrase and the new T-shirt is embrace the target.
Yeah, you can't really play the underdog card any longer because they're the Super Bowl champions, and
right.
You can't walk 10 feet around here without a reminder of that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to say we're the underdog. So the Eagles are taking the opposite path and embracing the fact that they're going to be the target, and they are. I mean, they're the Super Bowl champions, and everybody's shooting for them. So instead of the underdog match, now we're going to have the target talk.
Of course. And you tweeted out, just a picture of Nick Foles at the podium and saying essentially the target is now on the Eagles' back. And Doug Peterson, when he spoke, he actually reminded everyone about his season as a player with the Packers being a backup and how they lost in the Super Bowl, failing to repeat. So after hearing all of that Target talk today and embracing being on top of the mountain, how do you expect them to be handling this new role as the guys that are being the hunted, not only today, but really just throughout camp and early in the season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it remains to be seen. It's very early. I think in a weird way it's helpful that guys like Carson and Jordan Hicks, who was back practicing today, and Jason Peters and Darren Sproles, all of that was positive that they were able to be in practice. I think the fact that so many good players missed the Super Bowl helps in a weird way because while those guys were a very important part of that team and are still Super Bowl champions, they didn't get to participate in the on-field fun, and they want to. So, and those are really good players. So you sort of have the human nature aspect of being satisfied by being Super Bowl champions. And no matter how many people talk about the fact that they're not going to let that affect them, it exists. But for certain guys and some certain very important players on this team, it doesn't exist because they didn't play in the game.
Right. So you segued into what I was going to ask you next a little bit. You brought up Jason Peters, you brought up Sproles, you brought up Hicks. I mean, there's a ton of IR guys, those guys I just named. Other injuries, Graham and Jernigan in the offseason. Nada had a season-ending injury in 2017 on the IR. Sidney Jones is a year removed from a torn Achilles. So all these injured guys, what can we expect from them? How much are we going to see, if at all, from these guys in camp and in the preseason?
Well, I don't think you're going to see much in preseason. I mean, I think that whole mentality has shifted the NFL to get your core pieces healthy to week one. I think that's the more important part. You'll see cameos, but you're not going to see significant action for any key players. I asked Carson today flat out, does he think he needs to play in a preseason game to be ready for September 6th? He said no. Brandon Graham, who was on the PUP list and not healthy enough to practice, asked him about his timetable. It's week one. He's not concerned about the preseason. And no veteran player is, to be honest. I mean, it's just not important to them. And it's understandable. I mean, they've been through it a lot, and they don't need it as much as younger players. So that's what the preseason is for, and that's what it'll continue to be for.
Yeah, so the Eagles make somewhat of a little move there, getting a veteran receiver in, Aiken, to the Eagles now. He'll be in camp, and the Eagles are not short on receivers. They have 12 receivers on this expanded roster, so Jeffrey, Wallace, Aguilar, Hollins, they're really the locks to make the team. Et cetera. But I'm not going to list every one. But there's a bunch of guys now fighting for, one or two spots. So out of that receiving group, who are the guys? Who are you guys? Who are your guys that are going to make that one or two spot?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's four guys that are locked barring injuries, and that's Alshon Jeffrey, who was on the PUP list to start camp. But, again, week one should be the goal there. Nelson Aguilar, Mike Wallace, Mac Hollins. And then you start talking about the fifth receiver and sixth if they keep six, which they may or may not do. Typically, when you're that deep on the 53-man roster, you need to help on special teams. So that gives, to me, Shelton Gibson a leg up because he improved on special teams late last season. If you want the better receiver and Marcus Wheaton can stay healthy, he's worlds above any of the young receivers in camp. He knows how to play in this league. He's been successful, but he's had a lot of injuries. And I think a guy like Aiken's brought in because you need sort of that big, lengthy receiver. He's a 6'2" guy. When Jeffrey's not able to practice, you need to at least be able to replicate that in practice.
John McMullen with us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles Insider. John, you write on our website, Day One News and Notes, about Sidney Jones being that Day One option in the slot. Do you see him in that position moving forward, or was this just a, yeah, you're a good body to throw in there, that you're the next guy up to take a look at?
Well, Jim Schwartz has said time and time again he's going to continue to roll bodies in there to see who the best option is. Sidney started OTAs. He was the first guy, but he did roll through a lot of bodies, and he's the first guy again as we get to training camp. And what that tells me is he's a tremendously talented player, and they want to get him on the field. I think the only question is he's never played in the slot. Even going back to college at Washington, he never played in the slot. And guys that talented, they don't, because it's more important to have them outside the numbers. I still think it shakes down as Jalen Mills and Ronald Darby start left cornerback and right cornerback respectively, and then Sidney comes in the nickel, but Jalen Mills will be likely the guy, in my opinion, who will move inside, and Sidney would then play left corner. But he's taken a look at everybody. Even Ronald Darby got a look in the slot in the spring. Devontae Ballsby was sort of the off-season star. You're going to hear a lot of names about that slot position because the Eagles are kind of feeling their way. And Patrick Robinson was a big part of this team, and he's gone.
Jordan Hicks back in the middle at linebacker. His eyes had to be big just to be out there and actually in something that was somewhat resembling real. I know you say it's not full bore, but it's certainly more than just working out in the gym at the NovaCare complex.
Yeah, I mean, club rehab, they call it. The guys all rehabbing together, those star players. Yeah, Jordan was thrilled, got a chance to talk to him in the locker room after. He's very happy to be out there, getting the band back together, so to speak, with Nigel Bradham. And there'll be the 2-3 down linebackers. And the concern beyond that, and something Jordan and Nigel are taking very seriously, is getting other guys ready to play, whether it's Corey Nelson or Camus Grugier-Hill or Nate Gary. They got to find another linebacker somewhere, and the bodies behind them are largely unproven.
So training camp day one today. Jim Schwartz speaks tomorrow. They're also punt return and special teams, right? Darren Sproles, first chance to get out there. Do we have an idea of how much he's going to be used? I know somebody asked, I believe it was Nick, maybe Carson, somebody asked about Darren Sproles and how the running backs are going to be used, and he's like, hey, man, that's coach's department. I'm not answering that.
Yeah, he's going to be used a lot if he's healthy, and that's because Doug loves him as a player. Obviously, he's going to be the punt returner. He was the first-team punt returner during special teams drills today. That's no surprise. But when the first-team offense was out there, it was interesting. I think the first 4 plays they ran, 2 of them involved Darren Sproles.
Symbolic,
Peterson,
right?
Yeah, no, it's not symbolic. Doug Peterson loves Darren Sproles, loves him, and thinks he can do multiple things when he's in the game because he's well-rounded. Obviously, he can catch the football, he can run it, and he's also a great pass protector. So I think if you look at the 2016 season, when we all talked about Ryan Matthews was supposed to be the top back, and all of a sudden Darren Sproles kept getting more carries and more carries. And the beginning of last year, same thing happened. It was only 2+ games he got hurt against the Giants. Doug kind of defaults to Darren Sproles because he likes him.
Right.
And he thinks he's a great player. Now, while I say that, he also recognizes his age, his size limitations. So I'm not saying he's going to get it 30 times a game. But when you see key points of games, a big third down where they need something, he's going to default to Darren Sproles.
I didn't mean symbolic as in trivial. I meant symbolic like I believe that Doug Peterson probably since everything is so planned and scripted, like I wouldn't be surprised if he said, you know what, on some of our first plays, let's get the ball in Sproles' hand to show the rest of the team we're welcoming this guy back. I meant more like it was thought out.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, you're right. That part, yeah. He loves him, as I said. If you ask me, look, there are certain guys on this team that are great, just great football players. And Fletcher Coxes of the world, the Lane Johnsons, Carson Wentz, they're superstar players at their particular positions. But if you ask me who Doug Peterson trusts the most on this team, Darren Sproles is top 5.
We trust John McMullen. He's with us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles Insider. His training camp officially opens today. They go through a 10-10-10. I assume it'll ramp up tomorrow. Doug talked about pre-snap penalties, John, and you wrote about Jeff Stoutland being irritated at one point, so it wasn't necessarily the cleanest day, I presume.
No, I mean, it wasn't, and it's not supposed to be day one. There were a number of pre-snap penalties on both sides of the football. Michael Bennett jumped off sides at one point. Isaac Seumalo had a real difficult time with some shotgun snaps as second-team center. So that stuff will get cleaned up. I mean, obviously, the first practice after being off 5 weeks, you tend to know it's going to be sloppy. It's just a matter of how sloppy.
You bring up Michael Bennett. Did people talk to him today? Is there a timetable for when he's going to talk to the group, or will it be just grab him individually?
Yeah, at this point, it's just, 90 players, and Doug talked today, Nick talked today, Carson all talked today at the podium. So it's kind of hit and miss if you're at the podium
right,
listening to those guys. I did not personally speak to Michael Bennett. I don't know if anyone else got him. He's generally very accessible, though, so that won't be an issue. I think, when I talk about Michael Bennett, I think the weird thing to me is since Brandon Graham hasn't been able to practice throughout the entire offseason, he's typically the starting left end. The Eagles had Michael Bennett playing left end in the offseason, and it continued today. And I don't understand that, because when Brandon's back, in theory, Michael would be playing right end, but the Eagles haven't given him one snap there. So it's going to be interesting to talk to Jim Schwartz what the plan is and what is going on with that defensive line rotation.
Yeah, and if I'm asking about Michael Bennett, that makes me think it was off-the-field issues, but you learned a nice nugget about Nigel Bradham. Tell us about how his suspension could have been worse.
Yeah, according to Nigel, he was going to be suspended for 6 games, which makes some sense because that's supposed to be the baseline for domestic violence issues, and they would sort of lump in punching a Cabana boy in the face into that category. And he claims the appeals process knocked it down to 1. So I don't know if that's the way it happened. That's the way Nigel heard it happen. That is really a sharp reduction in penalty. Typically, they cut it in half or something of that nature. I've never heard 6 go down to 1, but it looks like the Eagles got a big break because they are very thin at linebacker. And if Nigel was not there for 6 games, that would have been a big, big issue.
So John McMullen's with us, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles Insider. Training camp officially opens today. Now, John, you mentioned Jim Schwartz talking tomorrow, and he's usually pretty interesting and fun to talk to for the media. There's a nice give and take. Maybe the Jim Schwartz comedy hour, you could almost sum it up as. But Carson Wentz had a little unintentional comedy today. How did that take place?
Yeah, and he showed great timing. He really did. And Martin Frank was the reporter who asked him.
Okay.
He didn't mean to ask it in the way he did, but he asked him if he got any workouts in during his honeymoon. And of course, the bunch of degenerates we are as reporters
started
immediately
chuckling.
go into a certain direction. And Carson figured it out. He said, he got in a workout or two, and everybody laughed, and he paused for comedic effect, and then he said, in the fitness center. So obviously, Carson just got married, was able to congratulate him, was in Greece, and there were no setbacks. But, yeah, he did it. I didn't know stand-up comedy was in his toolbox of traits, but he did a good job today.
The ever-expanding world of number 11, Carson Wentz. John McMullen with us here every day at this time on the 4 o'clock hour on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. He's our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, also an NFL columnist for Get More Sports. Find him on Twitter. I love the fact your Twitter handle's great, John, because instead of having to go JOHN, I just type in JF, and you're the first name that comes up. At JF McMullen is his Twitter handle as well. And we'll catch up with again tomorrow at this time. Thank you, Johnny Mac.
All right. Thank you, guys.